Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed, part 3 Q&A. We've done it. We've pulled it off. I mean, you guys kind of did. You asked enough good questions, so I guess good job to you guys. Now we'll try and answer them. But before we do...
Today's video is sponsored by Gigabyte's GeForce RTX 50 series gaming laptops. The Aorus Master 18 and 16 are super high performance beasts with up to RTX 5090 laptop graphics, stunning 240Hz HDR displays, and top-end features like a PCIe Gen 5 SSD and Wi-Fi 7. The Aero X16 Copilot Plus PC is the perfect choice for gamers and creators on the go, with a portable chassis, up to RTX 5070 laptop graphics, and a high-resolution Pantone validated display. The gaming A16 and A16 Pro are also available with up to RTX 5080 laptop graphics, wind force cooling, and overall great bang for buck. With Nvidia GeForce RTX graphics, you have access to superb performance and cutting-edge features like DLSS 4 transformer model upscaling and 4x multi-frame generation. To learn more about Gigabyte's RTX 50 series gaming laptops, check the links in the description.
If the RX 9070 GRE, the best sort of letters you could possibly use to describe what is a graphics card, eventually gets a global release, what MSRP should AMD price it at to make it a worthwhile or no-brainer purchase? For reference, it's about 10 to 15% slower than a 9070 with only 12 gigabytes of memory. So yeah, the 9070 MSRP, $550 I've heard. The GRE would be 20% cheaper at $450, which I think would be sort of the highest max price they could possibly charge. That would make it about, 13% slower. You said 10 to 15, so that I agree. But yeah, the less VRAM thing. So I think $450 is the max they could charge. I think to make it a no-brainer, though it's hard to sort of attribute no-brainer with 12 gigabytes at these sort of higher price points, in my opinion, given that we think you keep it for at least 4 years. $450 max. I think $400 becomes like good deal where you would snap it up and go, I don't care, the 12 gigabytes of VRAM thing, I'll live with that. And then a no-brainer, I mean, you're getting down towards like 9060 XT, 16 gigabyte pricing. And
it should be over 20% faster than that model.
Yeah, so at that point, it becomes like, do you want the extra VRAM or the extra performance? And then how much more expensive does it end up being than that card? Because once you dip below, as I said, $400, it's meant to be $350 for that part. They're selling it like $370 at the moment.
Yeah, that's the difficult part, isn't it? That's an MSRP comparison, but then what does it matter when the real prices are so different? Because, for example, right, like, the 9070 itself is not a great product at $550 if you could buy a 9070 XT for $600. I think the non-XT model should be more like $500, in which case then the GRE should be more like $400 instead of $450 max. And then I guess that kind of makes sense if the $350 9060 XT 16 gig exists, but it's encroaching a bit on that product. And you'd really have that battle between the performance and the VRAM. Like, so, what do you want more of? Do you want a better price to performance ratio with worse VRAM, or do you want the opposite?
Ideally, you want it to come in at the 16 gigabyte 5060 Ti pricing or thereabouts and knock that card down more towards the 8 gigabyte model, which is in some instances selling for as much as $50 US below MSRP already. So I don't know. Yep. Do with that information what you will. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because it probably will get a global release at some point because that's the GRE way, or at least it has been for the most part, and it'll end up where it ends up.
Yeah, I think it won't be I think it will be difficult for AMD to have that product make economical sense for them because it's the same GPU die as the 9070 XT. We're saying they have to sell it for maybe $200 US less, and the only thing they can cut out of it is 4 gigabytes of VRAM. Obviously, it's defective dies. They have to use those for something, but already some of those defective dies would be 9070s. So you're talking about the next level of defective. How many are they making? Does it even make sense to make that product? I don't know. We'll see. I think in China, where it's currently being sold, it's being sold for something like a $500 US equivalent, around that sort of price, which isn't great. So if that is the global price, I don't think it'll be overly successful, wouldn't make a lot of sense, probably just don't bother. So we'll see. We'll see what they do with that one.
Why is it taking so long for AMD to get FSR4 into more games? Just AMD stuff, I would have thought.
Yeah, it's just AMD stuff. I mean, in my opinion, I think AMD's probably done the best job they have so far of getting FSR4 into games quickly, as opposed to previous versions of FSR. FSR3's launch was pretty much a disaster on the games front. It took a long time to get any sort of reasonable support for that. When they launched FSR 3.1, I think that was only in like 1 or 2 games for months until you started to see more developers get on board with that. But the fact that FSR 4 only requires a driver whitelist, they upgrade existing FSR 3.1 titles, I think that's allowed them to add a lot more game support a lot more quickly. It does still obviously rely on game developers integrating at least FSR 3.1, and then AMD needs to go and release a driver to then support FSR 4. So on that front, we have to give them credit. I think outside of that, though, they have been pretty slow at getting the FSR4 whitelist into the driver for titles that launch with FSR 3.1. One of the more recent examples is Cyberpunk 2077. Recently had, I think it was title update 2.3 or something like that. It added in support for FSR 3.1, and I think CD Projekt Red advertised support for FSR 4, but as far as I know, and maybe by the time this video comes out, AMD has released a driver, but the driver from AMD wasn't released to have the toggle in it to then enable FSR4 support. So that is a little slow. I think Nvidia Nvidia does do a better job of those things in that when games advertise DLSS4 support, the driver also already has support for DLSS4, also because DLSS4 can be integrated into games. So Nvidia does a better job of that. I think the other thing that this question is probably coming into is why aren't we seeing older titles with FSR4? I think there's always been an issue for AMD. Nvidia's got much more brand and market share. They've got more money to deliver engineering resources. My understanding is it's not so much they pay developers to integrate DLSS into games, but it's more they have a large number of employees who are Nvidia employees, engineers that they pay to employ, who then go out to game studios and get Nvidia tech integrated into games, which includes DLSS. And you'll see that in the credits of games. They'll often be way down after all the employees that work on the title. Down at the end, you'll see AMD, Intel, and Nvidia engineers listed in the credits. And so Nvidia's got way more resources to support those sort of things, which allows them to get technology into many more games. I think they've done an okay job at getting FSR4 into the current titles people are playing. Again, it's a little slow on some of the drivers, but out of 2025 releases, they've done a pretty okay job compared to previous versions of FSR, and I think they'll probably get better at that over time. But yeah, like getting it into older games is going to be a struggle, I would think. I think a lot of those FSR 2.2 titles, for example, I can't see them being upgraded, which is obviously going to be an issue if that was one of your favorite games and can't be upgraded to FSR4. But hopefully, in 2 or 3 years, AMD's got a bulk of, the last 2 or 3 years of releases that support FSR4, and this isn't as much of an issue. What do you think would happen if Nvidia decides it wants an off-ramp from the PC gaming market? Would consoles take over? Would AMD give up on it too? There's no way that I see there not being a PC GPU market. I don't see why.
Well, it would have never existed to begin with, because if you go back decades, it was such a tiny, small niche industry. Yeah. And now,
it's massive now.
It's huge.
I think there would be a void, let's say in the hypothetical, Nvidia leaves, therefore AMD leaves for whatever stupid reason. The void would be an 8-figure plus. No, we're talking about 10 figures, right? I'm talking tens of billions of dollars market.
Well, I think Nvidia made $10.4 billion from gaming revenue last year, and that was up 15% from the year prior. So not only is it $10 billion, I know it's maybe a drop in the barrel compared to I think it's just shy of 20% of the revenue they made in that period. Most of it's obviously the server AI stuff. But that's massive, and it's a growing sector. So generally businesses don't walk away from multi-billion-dollar industries that they dominate in, and it's growing.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a really dumb business decision. I'm not saying that they wouldn't heavily prioritize AI.
Yeah,
But you're employing, essentially my thinking is, right, you're employing all these employees working on the GeForce team, but the GeForce team actually makes $10 billion and is growing. So why would you fire all those people?
you know what they
no
do?
Sense.
You know what they do? Call me crazy. I know it's tinfoil hat time and everything. But what they do, bear with me, is they increase the prices astronomically and give you less. So if you can imagine a future where GeForce gets more expensive while being less impressive, that's what would happen. They would never exit the market. They would just charge you more while giving you less.
And they certainly have not done that yet.
No.
There's
this is
no
future.
way that they would have done that already.
This is a future thing.
But anyway, if Nvidia and AMD left a $10 billion industry, some company would fill the void. And yes,
Intel cancels Arc and it happens. They're like,
but it wouldn't even be Arc. Like there would be some startup. The GPUs would probably be terrible in comparison to what we have now. But there's just no way that industry evaporates and it not be filled with something.
like Samsung or
APUs,
someone would have
yes.
a crack at it. Like
There'd be Qualcomm Adreno GPUs or whatever.
Yeah,
right?
you can't have an industry where people are making tens of billions of dollars and they're like, nah, because we make more money here now, so we're not going to bother. We'll just leave that. We're going to leave that industry to die. Maybe someone else will pick up the slack.
And what usually happens in other industries is you actually see the opposite, is that companies want to acquire other smaller businesses to add to a global conglomerate. So especially in like food businesses, for example, they're like, you have some big top tier company that then owns like hundreds or even thousands of smaller sub-brands that all have their little niches in like maybe it's dairy or maybe it's like crackers or something or whatever. And like the crackers business is not huge or anything. Like they may only make on the millions of dollars scale, but the big conglomerate still wants to be diversified into all those different areas because as a business, you want to have a lot of different income streams. So this whole idea of like, GeForce going away doesn't make any sense. But then, if they did do that, like there'd just be so many other opportunities. Like PC gaming would not die, like because the demand is there for it, which is why things like consoles are still popular because the demand is there for consoles. So they make consoles. That's just how things work generally. The only way that GeForce would not exist is if they were losing money on it. Like if you had a big industry that was very popular with people and people were spending money on it, but it was losing the company money, that's when they would consider shutting it down because it makes no economic sense. But the fact that they're making lots of money means it won't happen. So nice hypothetical, but the realistic chances.
It's not really a nice hypothetical.
Well, it's nice to discuss and have some thoughts and things like that, if you enjoy that sort of thing.
I mean, the nice takeaway for me was I'm quite peckish now. I wouldn't mind some crackers and cheese or something, so maybe we can get that between questions. How do you minimize 1% lows? Is it a combination of hardware and settings or something else? So if you just mean like improve frame time performance, frame smoothness, all that sort of stuff, generally speaking, high-end, fast CPU. You can also tune your memory and stuff like that. That can help with 1% lows. But essentially making your because what creates a stutter is a pause in the system. There's something that's backed up, created a bottleneck or some sort of limitation that creates a moment, sort of a very brief hiccup. And the best way to avoid that is to make sure that the hardware is all very, very powerful, very fast. Having said that, there are also other things like you can limit peak frame rates because when you start to get extreme frame rates, the fluctuation in performance there, depending on the load, can also affect frame time performance. One of the interesting ones is like Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I first played that game with a really high-end CPU on a relatively mid to low-end GPU, targeting around, I think it was 70 frames per second, somewhere in there. And I didn't actually run into the traversal stutter issue almost at all, which kind of makes sense because it's probably the frame rates that consoles are targeting. And they have the necessary, plenty of VRAM and all that sort of stuff as well. So targeting more console levels of performance with really high-end CPU helped avoid that issue. And then as soon as you put like 40, 90 or whatever, and you start shooting well over 100 FPS, that's when the traversal stutter starts to become really noticeable in that game. So there are other factors like that, which is sort of what you suggested, settings and stuff. But generally speaking, a CPU like the 9800X3D, you're going to get pretty solid 1% lows.
Yeah, the other things that I would be thinking of is sometimes you can have background tasks conflicting with the game. So, performance monitoring software can hurt performance in some scenarios and cause a few more hitches and things, or can at least exacerbate when there is a stutter. It can be exacerbated because of some of the background software that you're running. Now, most systems can handle background tasks pretty well, so it's not often an issue, but it's something to keep in mind that the more things your system is trying to do and manage, and especially if you're running into situations where you're getting close to maxing out your system memory or your VRAM, it's having to start swap in and out of sort of the levels of memory as you go down. Anytime it has to do swaps of that nature, it will cost you performance in games and is more likely to lead to stuttering 1% low problems. So for example, if you're right on the edge of VRAM and you're running a background task that's using up a little bit of VRAM, you might be putting the game over into that scenario of having to go back to system memory. You'll get more stuttering in the game. And so you just have to be mindful of those things. If you're in one of those scenarios where you're not have heaps of overhead in terms of your CPU performance, VRAM, RAM, all that sort of thing. So that's another thing. But then there are some games which, unfortunately, you just can't solve 1% low issues. And that's been a big, while we've been fighting the VRAM front, I think Digital Foundry's been really fighting the traversal stutter issue in games where you could throw the highest end hardware at some games and you just cannot get around traversal stutter. So unfortunately, there's really nothing you can do in those titles. But in other titles, it can be a solvable problem to some degree.
All right, what do you think about AMD's rumoured 7 GHz CPUs and Intel's own X3D chips? Would such speeds be manageable in terms of temps and power consumption? I guess if they do it would be. And will the Intel chips actually compete with the current X3D CPUs? So first of all, 7 GHz CPU, it's kind of the first I'm hearing about this. It is a rumour, I believe, that came from the YouTube channel Moore's Law is Dead. No idea if Tom's right or wrong about that one. At this point in time, he'd know more than I do about it because it's not something I've inquired about or whatever. But yeah, this would be an upcoming Zen 6 architecture, presumably, using TSMC's N2X process. So that process is said to enable this while keeping, temps and power consumption manageable. But yeah, it's a rumour. Is there anything you think about this rumour? Any thoughts or things to add to it? Generally, we don't comment too much on rumours because there's not a whole lot to go on. It's just someone's said a thing, they've got leaked information or whatever, or claim to.
Yeah, I mean, it's always difficult with these sort of claims that initially sound outlandish. And I'm not saying that as an attack on the rumours or channels that say it, but whenever someone says a CPU is going to be 7 gigahertz, it's like, whoa. What's going on there? Is that accurate or not? So obviously that is going to lead to a lot of people, probably me included, sort of saying, is that realistic or not? What do the CPUs already do, like high 5 gigahertz up to 6 gigahertz in some scenarios? Right?
Yeah. Yep.
So you're talking about not even a 20% gain to get it to 7 gigahertz, right? So that's not outrageous. Like if you were saying, if all CPUs were say 2 gigahertz and you're talking about the first 3 gigahertz CPU, that'd be like an enormous gain. But it's not a huge clock speed increase, which makes it possible, I guess. The other angle is that we'll be jumping up 2 process node families. Currently, they use 4 nanometer, aka 5 nanometer family technology. TSMC 2 nanometer is 2 process families. So 2 nanometer is not a small revision of 3 nanometer. It's a whole new family from TSMC. It's a large revision. And so when you jump 2 process nodes, I guess anything is possible. I don't know the ins and outs of what TSMC is claiming in terms of, usually they make claims like you can get 20% more performance out of the same power or 30% better efficiency at the same performance level. Those are the sorts of claims TSMC makes between generations. So if you stack 2 generations, who knows? And those claims are always very complicated as well because they factor in, it's based on a certain design. So it may not necessarily be a CPU design that they're making those claims off. It could be based on a very specific test sort of scenario. It can mean things like frequency as opposed to IPC gains and things like that, or it can mean IPC instead of frequency. So it's complicated. I don't think it's a ridiculous claim, but I at the same time would be surprised if they managed to do a 7 gigahertz CPU.
Mm-hmm. Seems like it would likely be a much bigger performance improvement than I was expecting Zen 6 to be.
Yes, because you'd expect some IPC improvement, hopefully some IO die changes as well, which would solve some of the things that we've seen with the current non-X3D parts in terms of its performance. So if you stacked IPC, IO die, plus high frequencies, and high frequencies are good because they do improve gaming performance, whereas IPC...
Well, improve performance of just about everything, really.
Yeah, IPC is one of those things where it depends on the workload. Like if the IPC gains are in the area, then it's good, but if not, then you miss out. As we've seen again from Zen 5, they claimed a large IPC gain, but it didn't necessarily apply to the things we care about, like gaming. So yeah, if they can combine all those things, for sure. What was the other part of this? The Intel X3D stuff, right?
Yeah, so Intel technically has sort of a larger sort of cache tile-based solution already that they have in their servers, which is called BLLC. So it's the big last level cache. So again, it's something that they use on their servers. The Clearwater Forest Xeon server CPUs use them. We've never used these CPUs or seen them before, so we don't really have any personal insight into this. It's something that for a while Intel's been quizzed on and haven't really said it's coming to desktop, but then more recently maybe it is going to come to desktop because they need to compete with these X3D CPUs. So the rumor is that Nova Lake, which is expected to be launched in 2026, so next year, will include some chips with BLLC cache, possibly offering up to 144 megabytes of L3 cache on an 8-core CPU, which would actually be more than what you get on like a Ryzen 9 9950X 3D, which is 128 megabytes. So it's a plausible rumor. It hasn't been confirmed. There's no real evidence of it yet. It's just rumblings that Intel may bring that tile-based cache solution to their desktop CPUs to better compete. And we do know that, through previous testing, I think it was with the 10th gen, that the cache size, it was always sort of misconstrued that it was the cores. So if you went from a Core i3 to a Core i5, from a Core i5 to a Core i7 and so on and so forth, that the additional cores and or frequency was what gave you the improved gaming performance. And frequency certainly helps, but we found less so in most instances about core count and more to do with the L3 cache capacity. So we made this discovery and clearly illustrated this prior to the release or even announcement of AMD's X3D, 5800X3D. So this was a few years prior to that. We did the testing and found that it was the added L3 cache, the smart cache of these higher-end Intel processors that was the primary reason for the improved gaming performance. So yeah, that was an interesting test. We did that by isolating core count and core frequency and just changed the cache capacity through the various models. And yeah, very clearly demonstrated that that was where the big gains were coming from in pretty much, for the vast majority of games, it was the primary factor for improved performance. So we've known for a long time that L3 cache plays a significant role in gaming performance. And so the fact that Intel would be chasing that with those desktop CPUs, if they want to counter parts like the 9800X3D and whatever AMD has coming up, they're going to have to improve that because it's a highly efficient way of extracting more gaming performance.
Correct me if I'm wrong though. Haven't you done testing that has shown that Intel CPUs, at least the more modern architectures, don't scale as well from adding additional cache than AMD's architecture?
It's hard to know exactly what the reasons are for that. That shift was more from when they did the E-cores. So the P-cores obviously have access to that, but it's a different architecture, a different way of doing it. They're talking about more of a unified architecture with these changes, which would possibly revert back to what we saw with 10th generation. But there are a whole heap of other changes there that complicate like the cache hierarchy and how all that works. So without any other sort of point of reference, it's difficult to say what's going on there and why that is. But yeah, with the P-core, E-core designs, it seemed to be less of a thing, but then how much cache they're putting on the CPUs changed as well, which would mean there's sort of a cap on it. But again, I think there's probably a cap for those particular designs. Future designs would possibly better utilize that. It's really hard to say.
Yeah, I'm sure they would do testing. They wouldn't just release this part and go, here guys, is this extra cache you have to spend more on. They would only release that part if the testing had proven that it actually benefited gaming performance, which was certainly the case for X3D parts from AMD. And so Intel would move ahead with that design only in the scenario where it actually does something.
If you had like a 285K and then a 285K 3D or something, and that was no faster for gaming, then it would be a very confusing and truly bizarre release. So we won't see that.
Yeah, that's why AMD hasn't done things like add cache to the extra tile or the extra CPU die for like the 9950 X3D, because they came up with a solution that gave you effectively the performance that you should have been seeing from that part, but weren't seeing in the previous models. And so, there was always that talk of, is AMD going to add even more cache to this CPU? But just because of the way of the design, it didn't really make a lot of sense. So they never went forward with making that sort of part. So I assume Intel would be making the same decisions with their part. So, hopefully these rumors are accurate and we see, large clock speed improvements and gains to cache on the Intel side. We're just in the rumor phase, though. We don't know. Designs change. And especially with these rumors, like I know people want to, heavily criticize rumors and be like, these are completely unrealistic and things like that. We also have to keep in mind that companies can have internal goals that then aren't materialized. So they might be thinking of things like 7 gigahertz and extra cache on Intel CPUs at this point, but by the time it gets down to the point where that Zen 6 is actually manufactured or whatever, it turns out that they can't do that. It doesn't mean they never thought of it, it just means that, as it turns out, in the end, it wasn't possible. So always keep that in mind when you're seeing rumors and things. When rumors are so early as they are now, they can be based more around sort of theoretical concepts of what the companies want these products to look like, as opposed to hard specifications of what they actually will be at the end of the day. So, what difficulties do you face procuring cards in Australia, and how did you do it before you had the supplier relationships?
Supplier relationships haven't really changed for the most part. There's probably been a couple of examples where we've been able to get it a bit earlier than we would have otherwise. For the most part, we do get them from partners directly anyway. Like, for example, the RTX 5060, although Nvidia withheld the drivers and didn't want us reviewing that card, I had 2 of them probably 3 weeks before we went to Computex. So probably a month before the reviews were actually able to show up anyway, based on, embargoed stuff. So for the most part, not an issue. But also here in Australia, we're pretty fortunate that most things come in pretty timely. Like RTX 5050, we got that before I think it was showed up in most places in the US. It was just, and again, I used a retailer contact to get that, but I bought it when anyone else from the public could buy it. It was just that I got a personal notification that they'd arrived and I could come down and grab one straight away, and then they were put on the website and, people could do the same. So I didn't really get that earlier than what anyone else in Australia could have got it. It's just I was notified the second that they had it in, which was very handy because it allowed us to get a RTX 5050 review out quickly. But I paid for that. So probably the bigger advantage now is we don't have realistically any financial constraints. We can really buy as many graphics cards as we want, whenever we want. So that's a really nice position for the channel to be in. Whereas previously, we sort of had to and ah and work out, do we want that card or should we buy that card? When we had to buy things, we sort of had a smaller budget, so I had to prioritize what it was that we purchased. But now we're just like, if there's a new card, we just get it. And sometimes we buy them and don't even get around to testing them. Like I was going to buy a 9070 GRE, for example. I actually ended up not buying it, but that probably wouldn't have got reviewed if I did buy it, just because I think the 9070 GRE at this point in time is not particularly interesting. And we've had so much other content, like the pile of boxes of things I'm going to get through. So not really any constraints in that sense being in Australia. And generally speaking, though, we get pretty well looked after on the sample front, so it allows us to do our job and get you guys the information before you even have to worry about buying it.
Yeah, some companies over the years have been a bit more hesitant to send products that aren't or won't be available in Australia. So obviously there are some models of motherboards or especially monitors and stuff like that which may never be available here or are available in other territories long before they're available here. These days, companies are usually pretty comfortable sending products out, even if they're not available here, on the understanding that it's a like YouTube's a global thing.
Well, some companies, there's a frustrating amount of companies that in 2025 do not understand how YouTube works.
That's true. I mean, I think the big AIBs are really good at this now. Asus, Gigabyte, MSI for monitors.
When they want to be.
Well, I think with monitors, if I request something and it's like this product's not available in Australia or isn't as attractive in Australia because there can be pricing differences regionally, they still will send it out and try and get it, import it or whatever, or just send it directly from Taiwan or wherever they're located. Some companies still are a bit more old school where you kind of have to wait for products to be available locally before we can test them and they'll be willing to send them out. So, yeah, there is still obviously that old school mentality with some of them, as you've said. So it does depend. That's probably still the thing that we're sort of working to explain is the sort of global nature of YouTube to all companies. But when it comes to like the major stuff, as you said, graphics cards, CPUs, those are all usually global stuff, global launch stuff.
Sometimes, like on my side of the fence, it's a strategic thing. Like Asus, for example, didn't have any B850 Prime motherboards. They just, they're not coming to Australia just yet, so they can't possibly sample them to me. Like they're making them at their factory and they're sending them out to other regions, but it just wasn't possible for them to get one for me to test it and include it in my B850 roundup. So of course, we just went and purchased them. So I spent a couple of $1,000s bringing in Asus motherboards from other regions. None of the affordable, more budget-focused boards were to be sold in Australia. But what always happens with this is they do that initially, and then months later they appear in Australia after I've done my roundup. So anyway, I went and bought them all, and that content will be up on the channel very shortly, probably within 2 weeks after this Q&A. You'll get to see that. So I've got 46 boards in total, and I've basically tested all of them at this point, just a couple of updated BIOSes waiting for, and then you'll get all of that information. So B850 close.
One of the funny things that happened on the monitor side of things with the Australian availability, this is a company that was, I'm not going to name names because it's maybe a little embarrassing for them, but they, one of the companies that we didn't get a lot of samples from on the channel, and that was fine. I bought stuff every once in a while, and I was just, had a meeting with them scheduled for some launch or something, and I was like, it's great that you're willing to send out these products. We'd love to work, more closely, get more stuff in, even if it's not available in Australia. And their big hang up as to why they weren't sending stuff, which may have been an excuse, maybe it's not true, was they were very worried about not having the Australian power cable. So they were very concerned about shipping a US power cable or European power cable to Australia. And they're like, we want to make sure that you'll be able to plug it in. I'm like, guys, almost all monitors use one of 3 cables. It's either the normal PSU power cable that you see, the 3-clover one, or the 2-pin one. I have got loads of the Australian versions of those cables. Don't worry about it. If it requires an adapter because it plugs directly in, I'll sort that out. Not a problem. I've never had a monitor not work because of the cable or power supply or whatever. We always get it working.
That is truly bizarre.
And they're like, okay, great. And then, because like MSI often sends me stuff with like a European power cable or whatever. It's no big deal, but obviously their internal processes are a bit different. And then you run into some other companies where just internally the way they get like the local PR person or whatever, the way they get samples, they can only get it from the Australian pool of products. So they don't have an ability to import it from overseas, even if they're a global company. So that can be an issue with some brands. But it's just about trying to educate and sort of say, well, we're global. You can hopefully try justify it to your higher ups by saying Hardware Unboxed gets most of the audience from America and Europe. So if the products are available there, you're going to see a lot of eyeballs from those people. So
I think that's something even the viewers don't necessarily understand, is that we get Australians complaining that we don't do enough Australian exclusive or focused content. We try to make the content sort of accessible and useful for everyone. And the reason why we don't, first of all, do exclusive and heavily focused Australian content, like an LD PC or whatever we have locally here, is because it's less than, I think it's about 4% of our monthly viewership comes from here in Australia. I think it's like 3.7% or something. And then I think it's more like 20% is US. It might even be a bit higher. I'm not sure. I haven't got the exact stats here. But it's like the US, Canada, UK, they're kind of the big 3 for us. Then probably some other European countries, and Australia is right down there.
I think collectively Europe, when you add up all of the different countries in Europe, it's around the 40 to 50% mark for viewership. So obviously, Europe, there's a lot of different territories, but largely they have similar sort of pricing. Now, I don't want to insult Europeans, right, because it can differ. But if you're talking about like the Eurozone, for example, it's pretty similar.
They're all the same in Europe.
That's why I wanted to avoid.
Oh, whoops.
You've just torched all those people. So, yeah, I mean, that's why for example, the pricing, I think I did 10 country GPU pricing update. You would have seen those are the 10 most popular countries on Hardware Unboxed. Mm-hmm. And that's why generally if I'm talking about pricing, the main focus will be US, then European pricing, and then maybe I'll talk about Australian pricing. And that's purely because of viewership. It's not because I don't love Australia or something. I love Australia, but it's just a viewership thing.
All right, that does it, Tim. That time of the month is over.
That's certainly one way to put it, yeah.
I mean, of last month, because we're probably in the next month now.
Yeah. Unfortunate, but whatever.
July was a blast. We had a lot of fun. Good Q&A series. 3 parts. You love to see it. Other than that, though, it's good to catch up with Tim and answer your questions.
I'd say so, yep.
You enjoy it once again?
Yeah, I'd say so.
I think you normally say I always enjoy it.
I do always enjoy it.
There we go. Okay. Everything's as it should be.
Yep.
On that note, the join button or Patreon, you can sign up to either one of those and you'll get access to our exclusive Discord server where you can ask Q&A questions and sort of get prioritized. We do a monthly live stream for you, so Tim and I get together just as we are now and answer your questions live. That's fun. We have behind the scenes content and just stuff. So check it out if you're interested, but if not, perfectly fine. I won't hold it against you. Tim might, but that's
I will. I will.
That's very much a you problem then. And I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
See you next time.